Hey everybody, this is Miss Cherie with the Vocal Truths podcast today. A couple of things before I dive right on in. Once again, as you come in, please remember to like my page, share the video, and of course, please interact as you see fit. Please comment. Of course, I feed off the comments and would love to see what you guys think about everything as it's going along about your thoughts about the topic. Also, another announcement today is like the first day I'm really doing a simulcast with YouTube as well. So I already have a YouTube channel called The Vocal VOKAL, Truth, spelled like you normally would, but TRUTH for those who may not know. I have that page up. So this is the first time it's being filmed live here on Facebook and on YouTube. Normally I would try to upload it, but due to some concerns, I wasn't able to get that, but I have it straightened out. Next, yeah, I know last week I said I was going to be discussing Black voter trends today, and at the last minute, I literally changed the subject based on waking up or really paying attention to the news that Nick Cannon was fired by Viacom. So, of course, today's show is going to be about his firing, what the topic of his show was. And of course, we're going to further discuss the whitewashing of history. So, hopefully, you guys have some chiming in to do. So, at this time, the first topic, of course, is going to be Nick Cannon fired over comments on last week's podcast. Notice that I did not say that his comments were anti-Semitic because I don't believe that. I listened to the podcast. I heard what he said. I heard what Professor Griff said. And to be honest, truth is truth. Let's just be real. All he did was specify that Black people were the original Hebrews, the original Jewish people, basically. And he got fired over those comments. Those are the comments that they're saying were anti-Semitic. He didn't say anything negative against white Jewish people. He didn't say anything other than I think Professor Griff was talking about how or his original comments, because Professor Griff was basically blackballed from Public Enemy had to distance themselves away from him due to his anti-Semitic comments, and basically once again those comments were the same thing about Black people being the original Hebrews or the original Israelites, however you would say it. They were the first ones, and at the end of the day, that's true. So I really don't understand why they're being fired, but other than typical, as much as I would love to be a little more PC, of course, because I'm just getting started, but it pretty much activated white fragility. Anytime Black people discuss being the first ones or the initial ones. And I went ahead and get started, but my special guest is coming in. I'm going to go ahead and add in Zach now that he's coming in. So I have a co-host today, guys. One moment. Hey,
Praise
Zach,
the
how you
Lord. Or
doing?
should I say shalom? Which one are we gonna get allowed to say today? Because I need to educate people on what anti-Semitism really means and have this complicated relationship that Black people have with our allies.
Well, you know what? I was just getting started because as you were listening in, I was also getting started on talking about Nick Cannon's firing and what was actually said on his podcast. So that's where I'm starting at. So that's going to segue right into your education, brother. Definitely, thank you for that.
Let me put the
Because
Nation of Islam glasses back on. I'm sorry.
yeah, please
It'll look better. It'll look better.
go ahead, Malcolm
I
Jr.
almost had my bow tie. I'm gonna go get my bow tie downstairs.
You should have. I asked you earlier. You had plenty of time. Plenty of time. So yeah, so when we were discussing that, we were just talking about how they didn't say anything against any white Jewish people or anything like that. And I was kind of segueing into kind of some white fragility there, because whenever we talk about how we were the original ones, we get a lot of backlash because this isn't new. Anytime we talk about Jesus being Black, there's backlash. And
Mm-hmm.
that's with other Christians, even though the description of the Bible of who Jesus is is definitely not describing a white male. I'm just saying. So whenever you mention a correction of who a lot of these figures that these people praise and it's something positive, it seems to be a lot of backlash. It seems to
Mhm.
be a lot like, no, this isn't a black person. And my take on it is more so that it goes into, it doesn't fit into the stereotype of black people being unintelligent, savages, violent. So anything like that. So if you're saying Jesus, this picture perfect person of Christianity and
Mhm.
of even temperament, peace and peaceful, he's our peace. Why would he be black? You know, it's a whole big thing. Like they don't want to see that, just like they don't want to see that black people are the Hebrews that were discussed in the Bible. But if you really know the geography of it back then, and Lord knows I'm horrible at geography, but if you know the geography of it, there's no denying that Jesus and the Hebrews were black. So
Exactly.
that's part of the problem. That it doesn't fit the narrative because why would these, you know, quote unquote good white Christians who were going around all the lands converting people to Christianity or any other religion be converting them to praise a black person? So that's kind of my take on it.
Mhm.
But when we go back into it that's what really to me triggered Nick Cannon's firing because they didn't really say anything negative, but definitely go into what anti-Semitism is and where it's coming from.
Well, yeah, I mean, I have the ADL's website pulled up, and anti Semitism is defined as the belief or behavior hostile towards Jews just because they are Jewish. That's how they define it. And they also say, like, any political efforts to isolate, oppress, or otherwise injure them, or prejudice or stereotype views against Jews. So anything you say that's linked to the Jewish community can be viewed as anti-Semitism and have consequences.
So basically anything they decide that they're offended by,
Period.
i.e. by saying that black people were the first Hebrews, first Jews, that's offensive to them, and they're going to deem it anti-Semitism. Not
Absolutely.
surprising. And as they said in the podcast, in Nick Cannon's podcast, both Nick Cannon and Professor Griff both agreed. You have to think about who runs the entertainment industry, who runs the media. So look at well, it's not an immediate firing. Let's be clear, because that podcast came out last week. But
Exactly.
it right, so they had some time to kind of chew on it and mull it over, and then they decided they were offended and wanted to let them go.
But I think that that's one of the things that's going on here. We're starting to see, like, with our alliances with people, that's the side effect of it. We call ourselves having liberal allies who are for us, but then something like this happens where, uh, uh, let's put it plain: the people who cancel Wild 'N Out don't watch Wild 'N Out. It's a form of punishment. When your mama used to take your toys from you when you were a kid, she was punishing you. She didn't take your toys from you to play with them. She took your
Right.
toys from you to make a point, to make a statement, to scare anybody else who comes off the script. That's how Hollywood works. You come off that script, there's punishment. It's lights out. You got to read from
Exactly.
the script.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point. Like when we're talking about is who he was talking to, and Nick kind of knew he was towing the line there, but Nick was also willing to speak the truth of what it was, and what it was is we already discussed it. It's the truth of who black people are and where our origins are. So when he got punished, it was like, yeah, it's not a shocker, but then when they kept, it's such a negative connotation because of course if someone really is saying or doing something really offensive towards Jewish people or encouraging or inciting type of violence, yes, that's horrible. Like no one would ever condone such a thing. So then I was shocked when I see a headline such as, oh, Nick Cannon let go over anti-Semitic comments, and that's not, and then when I'm listening to it, and even when I'm reading the synopsis of what he said, it's like,
Mhm.
where was the anti-Semitic
Right.
comment? Like, Like, are you serious? This is what you're going to let him go over. And what I'm noticing is that they definitely, like you said, they basically took away his toy. They kind of let him go from there, but he has a couple of other things that are still in the works. And so it doesn't look like he's being let go from that right away, because it's not on the level of, say, the Mel Gibson anti-Semitic
Right.
rant. It's definitely not on that level. And he definitely didn't say anything nowhere near that level. So he's not being completely blackballed, but basically a little punished, like a little slap on the wrist, so to speak, to me.
Well, this is the second instance in a week. Remember, you had this Sean Jackson from the NFL who had the
Yep,
situation last week, and then I think Steven Jackson
yep,
co-signed on him and said something to that effect. But it goes back to last year with Tameka Mallory, 2 years ago, when she broke
mm-hmm,
with the Women's March because she supported Minister Farrakhan. Farrakhan,
mm,
Minister Farrakhan is part of this central common denominator. When you align yourself with him, then you have to be careful. Years ago, I supported him on a blog when I was friends with Nation of Islam people. And I got nervous about having my name because every time I Googled my name, I would see my name supporting Minister Farrakhan. But then it goes back to Black people. Where are your morals, your values? What do you stand for? Why are you afraid to
exactly.
stand up for stuff? Like it, Mr. Farrakhan isn't promoting Black people killing each other or people killing Jewish people. You know, he's not promoting he's never said the racial slur for Jews or for Black people. He's never said anything like that. But in the entertainment industry, if you align yourself with him, it's lights out. You know, in even in
Right.
the women's feminism movement, it's like it was lights out for Tameka Mallory. You know, people they stopped dealing with her because she took a stand to say, "I'm not going to throw Minister Farrakhan under the bus," and I'll always respect her for that.
Right. And that's because aligning yourself with the Nation of Islam, period. Actually, I want to say that the FBI probably labeled them as a terrorist group, so they're always
Hmm.
going to be monitored. So if
Hmm.
any Black person aligns themselves with the Nation of Islam, which means to me de facto that you support Minister Louis Farrakhan, then yes, you're automatically tagged. They watching you too. They watching everybody. So that goes under that, but also once again, that goes under the undertones. What are most of the undertones of what they say Minister Lewis kind of says, which is they all try to accuse him of being anti-Semitic. Um, Now, yeah, sometimes his comments definitely more than toe the line,
Yes.
but at the end of the day, yes, they attach that. I noticed that's a thing when they really blackball someone is there. You know, people can get a slap on the wrist for saying the N word, but
Right.
if you say something against Jewish people, it's lights out. Period. White, black, Asian, Hispanic, whatever. It doesn't matter. Lights out as soon as you say something against the Jewish community in anything that's deemed anti-Semitic. Like,
Lights out like this.
right, like like you are no longer you're a non-factor, like basically after that Mel Gibson incident, think about it. And the reason why I bring him up is just because he's the only white person I can think of off the top of my head
Hmm.
that was really blackballed that you haven't seen anything from since then.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So that's one of the things right there, is that you haven't seen anything from them since then, and it's just like, okay, if that's the case, you know, they really do control everything and can make sure, like when you look at a lot of music producers, music labels, when you think
Hmm.
about all of the entertainment company heads, they actually they are all in that community. So it's very easy to get blackballed as soon as you say something wrong and towards that community. The other thing I want to bring up about Nick Cannon's firing was, it's a post circulating on Facebook, and I don't know, how real it is, but I'm pretty sure it's pretty real. And I was reading over in the synopsis of what Cannon's his commentary in response to being let go by Viacom was that he was trying to reach out to the head of Viacom to have an open discussion. Now, what I want to bring up about that was, number one, in light of the Black Lives Matter movement, didn't Viacom put Black Lives Matter statements across most of their channels saying they stand with Black Lives Matter, except for clearly if you say Black people were the first Jews, that they're not going to stand by that.
Right.
So I find that very hypocritical, um, extremely hypocritical, actually. And then when we were talking about when it comes down to the whole thing, he tried to speak up to the head. The head lady in charge did not really reach back out, and he said that was just indicative. And then he was like, "Oh, regardless." So that's just
Mm-hmm.
indicative of the fact that they really, he said that they weren't really actually trying to be more progressive. It's just a statement, and and basically what they wanted was him to do some bootlicking. They want him to do some public apologies. They
Of
want
course.
him to publicly say sorry, when really he just was going to go to the head and say, "Hey, I'm sorry if I offended you,
Right.
but this is the conversation that needs to be had." So he wasn't trying to be offensive. He wasn't trying to disrespect anybody. And as they both laid out in both of their statements on that podcast, nothing they're saying was actually anti-Semitic. But they already knew they were kind of towing the line, kind of in a little trouble. And it shows that there's no difference between Professor Griff being basically X'd out of the music industry because of his
Mm-hmm.
quote unquote anti Semitic rhetoric, and Nick Cannon allowing it basically in that interview and co signing it. So when it comes down to that, it's basically a case closed situation, but there's no difference in their viewpoint on they didn't say anything negative, but they basically shattered their belief in what their religion is.
I agree. I totally agree. But from henceforth, we have to look at alliances with all of our white liberal allies. And I'm not afraid
Mm-hmm.
to say that on video. We have to look at that because if you don't do that, then you'll be in a position where you're getting punished by people who are supposed to be helping you. I just think that
Exactly.
that's important. So we need have to do for ourselves and do for our own. And if our allies want to help us, great. But we want to have things where we go to each other and we get support from each other, and we don't need to be punished by outsiders. That's what I hope Nick learns from this. He just finished Howard at 40 years old. Everybody's
Uh-huh.
calling him anti-Semite for some comments, but nobody retweeted or posted when he finally graduated, when he turned 40 this year from Howard University virtually. Nobody's talking about how he went to a HBCU when he had a choice to go there in LA, to all of those universities that were there, USC, UCLA. Nobody's talking
Right.
about how Nick Cannon was producing shows in his early 20s, or was one of the youngest executive producers at Nickelodeon, or one of the youngest stand-up comedians when he was a little kid. No one's talking about that. People are only talking about these comments. And I think moving forward, hopefully Nick will align with other great minds and just create his own following, because he shouldn't allow himself to be blacklisted. He should create his own list. That's just
Right.
how I feel.
I 1,000% agree. There's a lot of black there's becoming more and more black people that are in charge and becoming like power people in the industry for him to
Mm-hmm.
align himself with them. Now, granted, I get it. Nickelodeon and all those other corporations is where he got his bread and butter. So
Mm-hmm.
you can't blame him for being in that direction, in that space. But now that that space is no longer conducive to what he's trying to do, and with his own enlightenment and his own education and
Mm-hmm.
with his own knowledge on this path, then yes, he doesn't have a choice at this point. He must
Right.
align himself with like-minded people. And if there are any allies along the way, great, but make sure that they're the appropriate ones and they're not the ones smiling in his face and waiting to stab him in the back later at the
Mm-hmm.
slightest bit of a misstep, because we know those are out there as well. So when it comes down to that, we definitely want to make sure we got all that covered. So the next one, that's enough on Nick Cannon and his situation, but that brings us up to the next step when we talk about the whitewashing of history.
Oh, please. This is why I
Uh-oh.
teach school. This is why I
Yes,
teach school.
Go ahead, Zach. Go
Huh.
ahead. I'm gonna let you have them. Go ahead. Let's go.
Whitewashing. Where do we start with whitewashing of history? First of all, most of us didn't know the truth about Christopher Columbus and celebrated Columbus Day for many, many years, saying we get the day off school, and we didn't know we was celebrating first someone who was lost because he's probably drunk. He thought India was over here in the Western Hemisphere. India wasn't that far, bro. You
He went the
sailing for
wrong
six
direction.
days and you still ain't in India? Come on, man.
Now he
And
made
then you gonna name the people you found over here Indians, which caused them to create the state of Indiana with the capital of Indianapolis. I taught this to my seventh and eighth graders as a sub, and they were like, we never thought about how dumb that is. So we've got Indianapolis, Indiana, named after Indians who never lived here in the United States. You talking about changing the name or something? Forget Aunt Jemima. Change the name of Indianapolis, Indiana.
because Native American doesn't do it for them, I guess.
Indigenous people, they lived on Turtle Island, and we're still arguing about language. I've been taking an English language learners class this semester, and today's like my last day. But it's all about the original language of America was not English. English and
Yeah, no.
Spanish are colonizer languages. The original
Right.
languages of people who lived here on this continent and the ones who lived in what is now known as South America, they spoke different languages. Native Americans spoke like Iroquois, and then the people down in Mexico, what is now known as Mexico, spoke Nahuatl and Mayan languages. They were colonized and they had Spanish forced on them in Mexico. We had English forced on us in the United States. Black slaves had English forced on us when we used to speak Tria or Wolof
Hmm.
or Mandinka.
Hmm.
We had their languages forced on us, but
Yeah.
yet they tell us speak English, be American. What?
What is American exactly? Because America is the original melting pot. But just to go back to when you were speaking about colonizing languages, just a reminder for those who are not familiar, you have to think about it. Spanish came from the Spaniards,
Thank
Spain.
you.
French is the reason why it was the whole Louisiana Purchase with the French, because they worked with us when we were just the colonies on the Revolutionary War. So
Haiti,
they, yep,
Louisiana.
yep, all that. So you have to think about the main colonizers were the British, the French, the Spaniards. Those are like the top three. And you got to think about other nations in Europe were not colonizing. Those were the big three that were going everywhere. That's besides the Greeks, but the Greeks largely stayed around Europe. They didn't really come over here until later. But when it came down to and if you think about it, you have to think about these were the big three because those were the three that had the ships and had the armies to do all of the conquering. So their goal was always to go travel around, kill, pillage, snatch the lands, and all that other stuff. That was always their goal. So yes, so they conquered, and so it's not just an American thing for them to have changed all of our culture and tried to quote unquote civilize us. They went around the world doing
Mhm.
this. So go ahead and we'll continue. But oh, the other thing I want to throw in was as far as the whitewashing of history, it's not just adding a white face to the history, but like you said, with Christopher Columbus, they made it sound pretty. They made it sound very like, oh, he
Right.
discovered America, and it's like, nah, he landed in the wrong spot and he killed
It's
all the
like a
people that was
premise to
there.
a cheesy Hollywood thriller. A drunk
Right.
guy ends up on the wrong side of town, breaks into somebody's house, kills the owner, needs somebody to help clean up the house, goes back to the other side of town called African Village, kidnaps people from there, brings them there, makes them the housekeeper, teaches and renames the house to his name, and then dares
Literally.
somebody to kneel for the pledge.
Exactly. Exactly. Like that's what it is. It's not just to add the white face because we know they did that to Egyptian history. They tried to make Egyptian history look white. And it's like, no, when you see any movie about um like Cleopatra and stuff, it's always like a white actress or something. And it's like how do you get that in Egypt is in Africa? A lot of people forget that. And the fact that you only hear about Egypt and not about all of the great other African kingdoms that flourished in that area. They want you to believe everybody was living in straw huts and not doing anything, and that's far from the truth. But that goes along with it. The whitewashing of history includes also omission of real historical facts. Or like we were just talking about it, what Professor Griffin, Nick Cannon mentioned as well, neutralizing history, making it less acidic or less offensive to them, basically setting up that pretty picture that we all like the Thanksgiving meal, like, oh, they came over and they shared it. No, no, they didn't. They didn't. That's not what, they did not share a peaceful meal ever. They literally took the land and then ration out the food that the Indians naturally shared amongst each other. And that's something else that I don't get. How do you come on somebody else's land and assign to them where they can live? Who does that?
Right.
It's like like you said, somebody breaking in your house and telling you, you know what?
You can stay in the basement.
Right, exactly.
You can stay.
This basement is yours. I'm not gonna charge you any taxes on living on your land. Nothing. It's like, who does, like, you gonna break in my house,
Where they
tell
do
me
that
where I
at?
can stay,
Come on, white
and
folks.
then tell me, you know what? Anything you make on this land right here is all yours. I'm not even gonna tax it. Ain't that great? On what planet? On what? No. But that's pretty much what it was, and it's crazy because it's like everybody just thinks is when we talk about whitewashing the history and changing the facts, we don't they don't do that. They don't say anything, and they all go along with it, and then when we come back later and we do these podcasts and we expose the truth, that's not common knowledge, because as they said back in the day, this stuff wasn't readily available. You have to go in the
Mm-hmm.
library, you have to search for it, you
Mm-hmm.
have to look, and you have to dig.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes these books wasn't even available in the library. It was available through
Thank you.
pamphlets that they passed around. So you have to know the right people to get a hold of this knowledge, this information that wasn't available, because you got to remember who also writes the history books. His story. It's their story. It's
I'm
their
not
version of it.
African. I'm American. Okay,
Right.
OJ. Whatever you believe, OJ. You got that wide nose. You got them big lips. You got that brown skin. You African. My
Right.
grandmama, this is the one I love the most. My grandmama not from Africa, with a boat brought her over here. Okay, so
Exactly. The
she might not have been.
boat.
They brought
Her,
somebody from your family over here on the boat.
exactly. On the
She didn't
boat.
come. She didn't come on American Airlines. They didn't have it like that back in the day.
Right. And
But
that shot
Southwest,
cruise.
maybe Spirit, maybe.
I wouldn't even give them the flight because look, that wasn't a Carnival cruise ride that was on that. And then we got to also think about it, like when we think about even slavery, like when we think about the young people who keep saying, "Oh, I'm not my ancestors."
Thank
First
you.
of all, let's be clear. That is at one point I used to look at it like, it's kind of innocuous.
Whitewashing of history. White
Exactly.
people are teaching you your black history when you say stuff like that.
Exactly, because they want you to believe that black people were docile. They want you to believe that those Negro spirituals were them singing happily. When really, when you look at the lyrics, it's like, nah, those are actually
Codes.
underground. Those were codes for the Underground Railroad. But
Yeah.
thank you for still being slow, white people, because they still don't know that. And it's like, you got to think about the fact that there were slave revolts. A lot of
Correct.
these young people seem to forget that there were Africans on that boat that decided to jump overboard because they decided death was better than
And
bondage.
fun. Cinque from Amistad. Where Debbie
Exactly.
Allen found out about Amistad in 75. It took her to 1997 to make that movie, but she said she was going to make the movie because she could not
Exactly.
believe that there were revolts or mutinies on the ship. We were kicking
There
it
were.
off on the ship.
Yeah, because we wasn't going silently, but they'll let you believe that we did. Some people choose survival, and then there were ones, you got to think about it. They didn't steal any poor people. Some of them, they stole warriors. They took royalty. They took they took people that were prominent in their kingdoms on their lands so that they can get a hold of that stuff. So they didn't take any old Joe Schmo from Africa. They took the best of the best. So we have to think about the fact that no, they were not going peacefully. You
No.
got some warriors or some king or somebody who was under the king or something like that who were like, hold on, we're not gonna just head there. No, you're not gonna just put me in chains and think I'm gonna be okay with this. Like
Mhm.
no, none of this was cool. But they had you thinking that black people just laid there willingly, layered up like that on that boat, and we just laid there and didn't do anything, and that there was no fight. And then Nat Turner, like when we think about Nat Turner's revolt, um, when we talk about that, that's very rarely taught. You have to get a teacher that's willing to teach that, because that is never in the history books. When I learned about that, it was always a teacher. And what I loved about the teachers I had along the way in CPS is so many of them were woke back then and knew the history, really knew.
Mhm.
And they did not teach us off the history book. They taught us what we needed to know if we were being tested for the state, but they gave us the real deal. So I was able to learn a lot of things that I probably would have come out of my basic elementary and high school education not knowing. And I definitely didn't learn it in undergrad. It was just stuff that I think one teacher or someone mentioned, and then I would do a lot of digging on my own. But it, once again, I had to do the digging on my own and find alternative things, because no matter what history book it is, even the college level won't have the correct history, because they want you to believe this pretty picture of docile Africans and
Mhm.
these friendly natives that shared with them when they came on this land, like there wasn't a war for it. You know what I'm saying?
Thank you.
Like they want you to believe that everyone just readily accepted these white people, and that they just readily, like, we welcome them in. And even if that was the case, we welcomed them in and you stabbed us in the back. So what the heck? So if either way it goes, it doesn't paint
Mhm.
you in the greatest thing. It's like, oh, the Native Americans welcome you with open arms, and you met them with guns and diseases. What they do
Exactly.
that at? It's like thank you
Right.
for welcoming.
Can't trust them. Can't, backstabbers. Not well. They front stabbers. They ain't
Right.
backstabbers. They front
They do it
stabbers.
right in your face, but they try to use that slick talk, that pimp talk. It's like, yeah, I know you already live here, but this here my land now, and I'm gonna need you to go over here to this corner because I got this.
It's still
No,
going on today. It's called gentrification. It's still
exact.
going on
Oh my
today.
gosh, yes they do. Like they, it's called white flight, and then the red lining. They want to cordon off where black people should stay because they don't. They still want us and other nationalities away from them. And then they decide, oh, you know what? All the transportation is in the city, and we'd really like to move back to the city and not out here in the boonies where we secluded ourselves. So we're gonna go over there, build up, raise taxes, and go ahead and take everything. So pretty much same thing. So it's all the same, and it really hasn't changed. And once again, it's the neutralization of the history,
Mhm.
omission, or actually just slapping the white face on somebody.
But here's a solution. So as a teacher, I don't just talk about. I'm not just a problem
Right.
sharer. I'm a problem solver, and I want Black
Same.
people to start doing that. After we share the problem, let's solve the problem. That's what we do in math class. The math teacher don't write 2 + 2 equals what on the board and then go to lunch. He shows
I mean,
you
some of them
how
might.
to solve the problem. Too many Black people get on social media and say 2 + 2 equals. All right, I'm done. I gotta go to bed. It's too much for
No,
me. No, show
I'm
us how to
definitely
solve
all
the problem.
about the self.
One thing I can do as an educator once I get licensed as a teacher next year is create curricula. You have to create curriculum that is culturally responsive to kids, making sure that if kids might need a little music, they might need more pictures, they might need pictures of themselves on the screen, examples of role models in mathematics and science. You need that type of curriculum to make sure that our kids can make it. So that's the first thing we can do. Then we have to increase parent involvement. Now, one of the roadblocks to parent involvement with Chicago Public Schools is that they made it harder to pass the background check. We actually had half of our parent volunteers not be eligible to come in and volunteer during the day because they added more layers to protect the students, of course, but they made it too difficult. So a lot of parents jumped out. And then third, we have to make sure that we're investing in the community and investing in the right people. I have since corrected myself about blaming Obama for not sending resources. He did send resources when he was in the White House, but the money always ended up in the wrong hands. We don't want it to go to Reverend Chicken Wing. He can't get our money. We need some educated Black people like you and I who know how to do evaluation and metrics. It's the same as getting a report card. Did you get an A or F? Did the money that we sent to the South Side of Chicago work? If it did not work and you did not get the violence to go down, you get an F and you get fired. We need to make sure that the money is going to people, not the loudest activists, not the most emotional activists, but people who are unemployed with a college degree, who know how to look at a spreadsheet and see where the money is going, to make sure that our people get the money where they need it. Those three things. So we need to make sure that we're engaged in our community. We need to make sure that we're doing better curriculum, and we need to make sure that the parents are involved. If we can do those three things, I bet you we can see less whitewashing of history. We can see more of our kids graduating or getting certified in fields. That way we can keep the dollar circulating in our community, and we won't have to go to our allies or get fired by them when we don't read from the script. What you think about that?
Actually, I love that. All of your points were on point. I just want to add, also adding in additional or alternative things like
Mhm.
podcasts like this one to let you
Number
know.
four.
Right. Number four.
And send her some stuff to the Cash App. Put
Right.
your Cash App at the bottom of the screen. For real, this lady, she going places.
Yes,
Let's see,
yes,
yeah, this
yes.
direction. I got a point that this lady, that lady right there, she going places.
Thank you. But
Amen.
definitely it definitely comes from the parents because we know, for example, I was watching a TED talk earlier, and the guy actually was an African American history professor who actually had to educate his son at home to help educate his Caucasian teacher at school about the correct teaching of the civil rights movement in Rosa Parks.
Yeah.
So it's things like that. And so right now in the immediate, we know CPS is not changing the curriculum. So it definitely takes forward thinking teachers like you, soon to be teachers, who will teach them appropriately that's outside of the curriculum, because we all know the bureaucracy and how to get
Yeah.
things pushed through is going to be a mess. So it takes teachers like you to be able to teach the real history and just doing it that way, the grassroots way. And then also, of course, like you said, parent involvement, just piggybacking, because parent involvement is key. Parents have to reinforce or help them find those alternative resources that are not going to be readily available even to this day.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I did want to go ahead and wind this down. You already gave me your your point of view on what the solutions are of whitewashing of history and making sure we're all together. Oh, my last parting word on that is let's get rid of that crab barrel. Let's smash it, because that's the other
Yeah.
downfall. We can't get anywhere if we're not readily willing to share information. We can't get anywhere and learn from each other if we're withholding information just to try to one up the next person.
I
So
agree.
it's all about working collectively and effectively, and everyone utilizing their individual talents, not just for themselves, but for the collective. So that's what I want to end with there. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Zach, for
Thank you.
joining me today and adding much needed and valuable information. I definitely appreciate you
I'm
today.
getting ready to do another live on IG, Zach's Films, ZAX Films. She got me
Yes,
warmed up. I got to keep going.
yes.
So
Keep
hop
going because I'm
on over.
about to come over there too.
Slide through. Slide through.
Come on and slide. So we moving the party to IG, y'all, at
All
Zach's
right.
Films. Go ahead and spell it again. Bye, y'all.